Chapter 1: Storytelling and Transformation. I was recently asked to present a lecture on storytelling in an online version of the animation convention I've been a part of since its inception, 12 years ago. My response was an enthusiastic yes. For one, I was on fire creatively, having just finished a novel I considered my most inspired work to date. I was eager to share my latest discoveries. But more importantly, I felt the event was much needed in light of the grim climate. The isolation demanded by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as months of social unrest and political divisiveness, had put many in a tailspin. More than ever, we artists needed to continue to inspire one another and remind ourselves why we do what we do. We humans needed to continue to motivate and inspire one another. Renewing hope in the face of futility is a daily struggle. We'd been forced into a cultural timeout. It could not have been clearer to me the moment of quiet contemplation was an opportunity to reflect on the thought forms and paradigms that had gotten us into this mess. When forced lockdown came along, I didn't bat an eye. As an artist and a writer, I felt blessed to have my craft as catharsis. It went a long way. Even so, as much or more than my writing, I relied on faith to get me through the trying time. Let me explain. I was born in 1968 at a moment when the world was on fire. A quick Google search will yield that during the year of my birth, both Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were assassinated. The Democratic National Convention in Chicago resulted in one of the lowest historical points in police brutality, and many of the civil rights demonstrations took place that would result in lasting, institutionalized social reform. The following year, 1969, brought both Woodstock and the moon landing. History has framed Woodstock as the quintessence of our interconnectedness, the very picture of communion in action. The moon landing exemplifies man's ever-evolving march toward realizing human potential. Neil Armstrong's declaration, "One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind," beautifully puts into words the paradigm shifts that yield possibility. Outdated thought forms like "man cannot fly" regularly dissolve and give way to new, more innovative ones, putting us a bit closer to our human potential. As an added plus, his wording expressed the power of individual accomplishment to impact the whole of humanity. The seeming disparity of these back-to-back world events can be easily explained. Crisis yields opportunity. Strife signals change. It is well known that man transforms through conflict resolution alone. On the microcosmic level, individuals resolve cognitive dissonance by synthesizing opposing thought forms into new, novel ones. On a macrocosmic or societal level, the status quo prevails until unrest, activism, protests, and demonstration, even storytelling and art, upends outdated institutions and paradigms. In 2020, many have speculated about the meaning of this seemingly unprecedented moment. What cultural shift might be on the horizon? The faith that has sustained me personally lies in the understanding that all strife signals transformation, and that man evolves solely through conflict resolution. Storytelling, by definition, is conflict resolution. In this way, the part we storytellers play in cultural transformation is beyond measure. Ayn Rand has pointed out that art is man's metaphysical mirror. Art and storytelling reflect back our invisibles, the norms, mores, codes, ethics, principles, and beliefs, whose evolution is just as crucial to our survival as that of our biology. Stories take the temperature of society at any given time, playing as vital a role as activism or persuasion. You see, it is equally well known that we learn more in the narrative realm than the didactic. When faced with political persuasion or propaganda, most dig their heels in adamantly, falling back on cherry-picking and confirmation bias to reinforce existing beliefs. This is the ultimate in mind, dominance, and ego. Storytelling, in contrast to persuasion, appeals to our emotions rather than our intellect. We change minds by touching hearts. My passion for the role we storytellers play in dialectic is what drove me to agree to the online talk. I took the opportunity to up my game. Not only did I compile recent discoveries in my own process, my relationship with craft, I brushed up on the academic view of story. This is where I hit a wall. Granted, I'm too subversive for my own good. The resistance that arose in me while reading up is nothing new. Traditionally, I reject any notion of right or wrong in art and literature. I'm more apt to speak of simple cause and effect, choices. I believe the creative process is malleable, and I'm hyper-aware of the proprietary spin each expert puts on standard accepted models of it. I am familiar with the infinite variations on the classic Western story arc, each with a proprietary twist that makes it brandable. Deepening my resistance, my lifelong knee-jerk rejection of the definitive was in high gear. But more than anything, my resistance was rooted in this. 90% of the books one can read on the academic view of screenwriting, literary craft, or storytelling in general are offered up as gospel truth with a singular caveat. The unspoken presumption is this, that the goal of good or effective writing is commercial success, or bank at the box office, bestseller status, as I put it, over literary value. Though mainstream commercial success and literary value can often be at odds, I don't think for a moment the two are mutually exclusive. I look to phenomena like The Lion King, my first film at Disney, as evidence the two can align. The film struck a chord with the masses, resulting in box office success and global significance precisely due to its literary value. Its resonant universal theme spoke profoundly of the human condition. The awkward intersection of art and commerce is as old as time, and I'm no stranger to it. In my ongoing journey with craft, I look to these rare confluences of artistic integrity and commercial success as luminaries, beacons of hope. For the presentation, I resolved my reticence by arriving at the following premise. One must consider the implied goal when offering any definitive advice on the creative process or storytelling. Only then do the cause and effect behind every choice remotely correlate with right or wrong. Further, I recovered my motivation to share my thoughts on storytelling by honing in on what I was most passionate about imparting. The why part of the equation. Not the nuts and bolts or mechanics of technique, but why we tell stories in the first place. The virtual audience was to be largely comprised of self-identified storytellers, whether wordsmiths or visual storytellers, each at a different stage of development. In the context of this book, I would argue that the drive to impart narrative is alive in all of us. It's synonymous with being human. We are all born storytellers with a unique, authentic story to tell. In 20 years of teaching at my alma mater, Art Center, I've been privy to many a unique creative process, and just as many relationships with the lifelong artistic journey. I have learned more by witnessing hundreds of students over 20 years of teaching than in my own journey or anything I could have read in a book. What I know beyond all else is this. At some point, most artists connect their chosen craft with an authentic voice by assessing what drives them in the first place. Once honed, that voice is then connected with a sense of purpose, and the circuit is completed by contributing it to humanity in some way. There is much evidence that man, pre-language, told stories around the campfire. This oral tradition arguably became the mythology that later informed religion. These same archetypes, or tropes for the more empirical among us, evolved into the Western storytelling structure, informing everything from the Greek tragedies through Shakespearean templates to the latest, greatest action-adventure movie at the corner cinema. This fact alone should be evidence that the drive is innate. Evolutionary theory suggests that all institutions, conventions, traditions, norms, and mores that persist over time and refuse to evolve out of us serve the propagation of the tribe in some way. If one accepts the premise that the drive is instinctual or has been wired into us from the first page of human history, the question then becomes why? Why is narrative synonymous with being human? Or put more simply, why do we tell stories? I ask that simple question day one of all my Art Center classes. The responses over 20 years of teaching easily distill into a list of usual suspects. To create permanence, leave a mark. In class, I usually volunteer this first one to get it out of the way. Many schools of thought posit that all of our creative efforts, from scrawling a herd of buffalo on a cave wall to building a temple or the Empire State Building, are attempts to combat futility by leaving a mark, lest we find ourselves nothing more than dust in the wind. The innate knowledge that we will come and go like so many before us is known as existential terror. To pass on knowledge. This reply is usually one of the first offered by students, followed, of course, by the mental image of a caveman in a fur pelt rubbing two sticks together to start a fire. Without written language, oral tradition was the only way to assure that future generations would be able to do the same and knowledge would not be lost, along with a recipe for ice, to the sands of time. But why not simply verbally relate step-by-step instructions? Why the narrative aspect? It has been well documented that perceptual interims, image associations, are crucial to learning and memorization. Hence the literary metaphor that makes story the most effective teacher of all. To entertain. In the early days of my teaching, I would nearly cringe, hoping my resistance did not show on my face, when this suggestion was inevitably voiced. To me, the phrase sounded a bit like to pacify, to divert, or to bide time. The elitist in me had much loftier, highbrow notions about the role story played in culture. Not to mention, I had a distaste for all the hours spent by younger generations blowing shit up, playing interactive video games simply as a diversion. I saw it as a luxury we couldn't afford, considering we had yet to achieve world peace. Oh, I've since come around. The endorphins released by laughing, especially in a communal setting, directly contribute to the altruism that serves our proliferation. Further, there's an argument that the catharsis provided in cinema, for example, is linked to the release of pent-up aggression. There is equal evidence, however, that without redemptive value, the same content is actually feeding a cultural addiction to adrenaline and cortisol. To explain nature. During the Bronze Age, oral tradition was dominated by mythology that largely served to explain nature. If a volcano erupted and decimated a nomadic population or destroyed a crop post-agriculture, the human compulsion to rationalize led to rather elaborate explanations. This mythology arguably evolved into religion. Comparative religion expert Joseph Campbell, among others, analyzes the shared mythological structure informing religions the world over, across time and regardless of culture. His video series, The Masks of God, is a good place to start, as is Hero with a Thousand Faces, the elemental handbook for the much-talked-about hero's journey, about which aspiring screenwriters at Starbucks can't seem to shut up. To impart wisdom. It may seem this function was already covered under the umbrella of passing on knowledge. But consider this. One definition of wisdom is that it represents theoretical knowledge infused with practical life experience. Another definition suggests that wisdom dabbles in more philosophical fare, the intangible conceptual realm of our principles, ethics, norms, mores, values, beliefs, and codes. My way of putting it is this. The thematic content inherent in story teaches us to live in the world. The individual's transformation directly contributes to the evolution of the paradigms and thought forms that comprise our social conditioning on the macrocosmic level. Epigenetics then ensures what's passed on determines our collective future. As catharsis. Below are several definitions of catharsis from different sources. 1. purification or purgation of the emotions, such as pity and fear, primarily through art.